Is the ViperClip actually worth it? There has been a fair bit of feedback on this tool. Some people get on with it straight away, others hit the same issue and write it off. So in this video, I'm going to take the main problems electricians are raising, explain what is actually going on, and more importantly, what you can do about it on site. But before we get into any of that, we need to be clear on what the ViperClip actually is and what it is trying to do. At its core, the ViperClip is a cable fixing system that takes a process every electrician already knows. Placing a clip, holding the cable in position, picking up your hammer, and then driving that fixing in cleanly, all while trying to keep everything aligned so you don't damage the cable or end up with a poor fixing. What this tool does is bring all of that into one movement, where the clip is already loaded, the cable is guided into position, and the fixing is driven in as the tool is fired. And yes, I know that changing hearts and minds from a task that electricians have done since their very first entry into industry is brave, but I was genuinely impressed with this bit of kit. And it's not just about the time saving on site, but reducing the physical strain, because you are not constantly switching between tools or repeatedly striking clip. And I know there are staplers out there that can do a similar job, but they also have their drawbacks. I used the ViperClip in the cable clipping distance video, where the focus was on how many fixings you actually need and how far apart they should be on an installation. And that brings us to another part of the conversation, because once you apply correct spacing, you often end up using fewer clips than you think. After that video went out, I had loads of messages from electricians who were having issues with the ViperClip, and it did catch me a bit off guard because I was not seeing those same problems when I was using it. Were electricians using it differently? Was I being paid to say how great it was? Or was there something else going on that needed explaining? Well, I'm going to dive into the 3 most common questions that I got about the ViperClip. And one thing that kept popping up was that the battery was not performing properly. People saying that it usually showed itself up first thing in the morning. The tool feels slower, less responsive, not quite as strong as you would expect it to be. But in most cases, what you are seeing is simply the effect of temperature. If the battery has been left in a van overnight during winter or sat on a cold site, it is starting the day at a much lower temperature than it would be in normal conditions. And all batteries behave differently when they're cold. They cannot deliver energy as efficiently, which means under load, the tool is not going to perform at its best straight away. And that's not specific to the ViperClip. You see the same thing in power tools, in electric vehicles, and in some home battery systems. I have done a video explaining why batteries perform differently depending on the weather, and I've left links for that in the description. I didn't have this issue because I kept the ViperClip in the house I was working in, so the temperature was always stable. So what does that mean in practice? Well, if you pick this up straight out of a cold van and expect full performance immediately, you might be disappointed. But once the battery starts to warm up through use, the performance will improve and it will settle back into normal. You can manage that by rotating batteries, keeping spares somewhere warm, or simply being aware that the first few uses on a cold morning may not reflect how the tool would normally perform. You do get a couple of batteries with the ViperClip, which would make rotating them slightly easier. Another solution could be like a Sunday league football match in the middle of January. Stick the battery down the front of your trousers and it will be up to temperature in no time. Another issue that comes up quite a lot is the gun firing intermittently. You pull the trigger and it does not feel consistent. Sometimes it fires cleanly, other times it hesitates or does not complete the cycle properly, and that can make it feel like the tool is unreliable. In most cases, what is actually happening here comes back to voltage and how the tool operates under load. The ViperClip uses the battery to wind up the internal spring mechanism before it fires, and that stored energy is what drives the clip into the surface, so it needs a certain level of voltage available to complete that process properly. If the voltage drops too low, the tool cannot fully wind that mechanism, so the firing cycle is not completed in the way it should be. And that is when you start to see that inconsistent behavior. And this often links back to that battery condition, because if the battery is cold or not fully charged, the voltage can drop under load even if it looks like it still has charge left. The ViperClip does give you an indication when this is happening, as the front light will start flashing to show that the battery needs to be replaced. Swap the battery out for a fully charged one as soon as that warning appears. You can also reset the mechanism by dry firing the tool without clips over a cable around about 20 times. That process will bring everything back into alignment internally, so when you go back to using it with clips loaded, the firing cycle is clean and consistent again. The next issue that was raised is clips catching the cable, and this is usually noticed straight away because the clip does not sit cleanly. It bites into the insulation and it looks like something has gone wrong with the fixing. What is happening here comes back to how the cable is being presented to the tool at the point it fires. The ViperClip uses a front cable guide to position the cable so that the clip is driven evenly around it, and that guide needs to be set correctly depending on the size of the cable you are working with. If that guide is not in the right position or the cable is not fully seated into the clip, it is no longer being centered properly before it is being fired. So instead of wrapping around the cable, it can catch the insulation as it is driven in, which is what creates that damaged, uneven finish. This becomes more noticeable on smaller cables such as 1, 1.5 and 2.5 millimeter squared cable, where the guide needs to be in the down position to bring the cable into the correct alignment. If it's in the wrong position, the tool is effectively set up incorrectly before you even start clipping, so the result is never going to be right. Angle also plays a part here, because if the tool is not kept square to the surface when it fires, the clip will not form evenly around the cable, which increases the chance of it catching. And it is worth keeping in mind that this is not unique to this system, because if you were using a standard clip and hammer with poor positioning, you could create the same damage to the insulation. And that can be the same for cable staplers as well. Once everything is set up correctly, the clips form around the cable as intended and the fixing sits cleanly. So hopefully that's answered some of your questions you had about the ViperClip. I really liked using it on that first fix job I did. It was faster and it was easier, and because they do metal fixings, it was also compliant above fire escapes and points of access. So it's got loads going for it. If you want to find out more about the ViperClip, then I have left links in the description. And if you want to see how you could save serious cash on clips, then click the video on screen now.